settle in and let your breathing slow, because tonight you are drifting inside a long steel hallway, deep under dark water. No windows, no sunrise, just soft red lighting, warm air moving through vents, and the steady hum of machines doing their jobs. You might think life down here is all drama, alarms, chaos, heroic sweating, but most of it is quieter than that. It is routine, checklists, careful hands, and the patient art of making sure nothing interesting happens. And somewhere in the middle of that calm, the sleepless scientist will guide you to the warm, controlled heartbeat of the boat, a nuclear reactor behaving itself one boring moment at a time. You are not down here to feel brave. You are down here because the ocean does not care what you feel. It applies pressure the way a calendar applies deadlines, steadily, without emotion, and whether you are ready or not. So you learn the first rule of life inside a submarine. Day and night are not things you witness, they are things you schedule. You wake when the boat says you wake, you eat when the boat says you eat. You work under lights that never change, in air that never gets a chance to be fresh, in the romantic sense. And that is the first thing you would not last a day doing, accepting that nature is no longer the boss. Procedure is. Your world is a sealed metal tube, and that tube is full of small agreements. Doors are shut gently because noise travels. Tools are returned because a missing wrench is not a quirky accident. It is a future problem, hunting for a place to happen. Conversations stay low because a submarine is basically a giant acoustic instrument, and you are living inside the body of the cello. You thought silence meant peace. Wrong. Silence means you can hear everything that matters. There is always a sound. A ventilator fan moving air through ducts. A pump somewhere pushing water through a loop. The distant vibration of machinery. The soft squeak of a boot sole on a deck plate. In a place like this, sound becomes information, and your brain inconveniently never stops trying to interpret it. That hum you hear, it is not ambiance. It is life support with manners. And because you cannot open a window, air becomes a managed substance, like money. You track it, ration it, clean it, and pretend it is endless, because you do not sleep well when you remember it is not. A submarine stays underwater for a long time because it brings its own little world. Not a perfect one, just one that is controlled. The air is kept breathable by turning chemistry into janitorial work. Carbon dioxide is pulled out, oxygen is added back in, humidity is nudged into something tolerable. The whole atmosphere is treated like a delicate aquarium. Except the fish are you, and you are very loud about your preferences. You do not notice oxygen dropping very well. That is one of the body's more insulting design choices. You notice carbon dioxide rising first. Carbon dioxide makes you feel it, a pressure in your chest, a restless edge, a headache that sneaks in like a bad thought. Your own metabolism, politely exhaling, can become a slow poison if nobody scrubs the air. So the boat scrubs. It filters. It circulates. It measures. And you follow routines, because routine prevents mistakes in a place that cannot pull over. On land, if you miss a step, you can improvise. Underwater, improvisation is what you do right before the investigation report gets written about you. Down here, competence looks like boredom. It looks like checklists. It looks like repeating the same inspection until your mind wants to wander, and then forcing it not to. Because this is a place where probably fine is not a comforting phrase. You walk past pipes labeled with colors and codes. You pass hatches that seal with a heavy, satisfying finality. You learn to move around sleeping bodies in narrow corridors, to step over knees and shoulders, to live in a world where personal space is an old myth from the surface. Even your sleep is negotiated. You sleep in a bunk stacked like shelves with a thin curtain that offers privacy the way a tissue offers armor. You close your eyes and the boat keeps working. It always keeps working. Your dreams are underscored by machinery that cannot afford to dream. And somewhere deeper inside all that quiet routine, there is a warmer, stranger heartbeat keeping the lights on. You turn down another passage, narrower now, more restricted. The air feels slightly different, warmer, drier, touched by the idea of heat being generated and moved around. The sounds are steadier here, not louder, exactly, just more certain. A constant thrum, like a giant animal purring because it is well fed. This is where you learn the second rule. A nuclear reactor is not a bomb. It is not waiting to become one. Like a moody teenager, it is a heat source, a very expensive kettle designed by people who were paid to worry. A bomb is built to release energy fast. A reactor is built to release energy slowly. A bomb is a door kicked in. A reactor is a door opened a careful inch, with someone standing there holding it, watching your fingers. Your job, if you are the operator, is not heroism. It is restraint. You do not chase excitement. You chase stability. You make changes slowly, because fast changes make systems behave like animals, unpredictable, easily startled, and prone to biting. So you stand watch. You read the same instruments again and again. You listen to the same machine sounds until you know them like a song you never wanted stuck in your head. You compare temperatures, pressures, flow rates. You look for drift. You look for anything that says, quietly, I am not as happy as I was an hour ago. Most of the time, the drama is watching dials and waiting patiently. There is a reason you would not last a day. The hardest part is not fear. The hardest part is nothing happening while you remain responsible for everything that could. Inside the reactor compartment, the warmth is not the warmth of sunlight. It is not friendly. It is a managed warmth, caged behind shielding, flowing through metal like a secret. The reactor is surrounded by layers of engineered caution, thick structures, dense materials, and the kind of design philosophy that assumes you will eventually get tired and make a mistake, which you will. Everyone does. So the system is built to make your mistakes boring. You do not directly see the reactor doing its thing. That is a surface person fantasy, the idea of staring into a glowing core. On a submarine, glowing cores are not considered calming. What you see are instruments, the reactor's behavior translated into needles, numbers and alarms that try very hard not to scream. You learn to read those displays the way a doctor reads a pulse, not because you are dramatic, but because you are stuck in the same tube with what you are monitoring. The reactor makes heat. The heat turns water into steam, and the steam spins turbines, and the turbines make electricity. Electricity becomes light, air circulation, navigation, communications, and the small comforts that keep humans functional, like being able to heat food and run pumps and keep the boat from becoming a cold steel tomb. It is all very ordinary when it works. And it works by being controlled. One dull adjustment at a time. You stand there and you keep the reactor steady. You do not let it wander into moods. You do not let it surge or sag or do anything that would make you interesting to the people who write manuals. You watch the trend lines. You watch the slow drift of temperature. You watch how the system responds to a change in demand. More electricity requested, more steam needed, more heat extracted, and the reactor's output must match. Calmly, like a professional. And if you think that sounds simple, congratulations. You have just proved you have never had to keep a complex machine steady for hours while your body begs for sleep. Because the reactor does not care that you are tired. It does not care that you are bored. It does not care that you have been awake for a shift that feels longer than it should. The reactor only cares about physics, and physics is famously unsympathetic. So let us talk gently about what the fuel is doing in the dark. You can imagine the reactor like a fireplace, if you promise not to get too poetic about it. A fireplace burns wood. The reactor burns something else, not with flames, but with tiny splits. Inside the fuel are heavy atoms, the kind that are naturally a little unstable. They are not evil. They are not angry. They are simply built in a way that allows them to be persuaded into breaking apart. And when they break, they release energy, mostly as heat. This is fission. It sounds clean when you say it. In reality, it is a messy, microscopic event. Fragments flying, neutrons escaping, energy dumped into surrounding material. The important part is that a neutron, a small, quiet particle, can hit one of those heavy atoms and make it split. Not every time, but sometimes. Enough that it matters. A neutron is like a tiny tap on a locked door. Most taps do nothing, but every now and then, the latch gives. When the atom splits, it releases more neutrons, and those neutrons can go on to tap other atoms. This is the chain reaction, which people talk about like it is inherently terrifying. But a chain reaction can be gentle. It can be a steady conversation instead of a shout. That is what a reactor does. It keeps the chain reaction at a controlled pace. It encourages a slow, even burn, more like a candle than a firework. And this is where you, as the operator, become less of a person and more of a babysitter for invisible physics, because your job is to manage neutrons. Not individually, of course. You are not down there with a butterfly net chasing particles. You manage neutron behavior with materials that either absorb them, slow them, or let them pass. Inside many reactors, control rods are used. They are not magical rods. They are simply made of stuff that likes to absorb neutrons. When you insert the rods farther into the reactor core, more neutrons get captured. Fewer are available to continue the chain reaction, and the reactor's power gently decreases. Pull the rods out a bit, and you allow more neutrons to survive long enough to cause fission. Power rises slowly if you are doing your job correctly. Notice the word slowly. That is the theme of everything you want to survive. And because this is a submarine, You do not have space for dramatic temperature swings. You do not have the luxury of a big open cooling tower venting steam into the sky like a bored dragon. Everything is compact. Everything is closed loop. Heat goes where it is told, or it becomes a problem. So you keep the reaction steady. You monitor it. You respect the delayed nature of heat moving through dense materials. You make small changes, then wait for the system to respond, like stirring honey and letting it settle. You learn that impatience is not an emotion down here. It is a hazard. The reactor core is producing heat because those tiny fissions are happening in a controlled way. The energy released does not come out as a clean beam of light. It becomes motion in atoms. It becomes vibration. It becomes warmth in the fuel, the cladding, the coolant. Heat is chaotic. It is countless tiny particles bouncing harder. It is the universe's favorite way to smear energy into the corners. So you treat heat with respect because heat does not need your permission to spread. And you never forget the simplest truth. Even if you stop the chain reaction, the reactor does not instantly become cold because fission creates byproducts, smaller radioactive fragments that keep decaying. Decay releases more energy. Less than full power, but not nothing. It is called decay heat, and it is the reason cooling remains important even after shutdown. In other words, even after you tell the reactor to calm down, it still has thoughts. So you build systems around that. You plan for it. You practice drills about it, calmly, like rehearsing how to carry a sleeping animal without waking it. And now, you are ready for the next calm problem, moving that heat away before it piles up. Cooling sounds gentle. Cooling sounds like a breeze, or a cold drink, or your feet sticking out from under the blanket. Cooling, in a reactor, is work. It is moving enormous amounts of heat through metal and water without letting anything boil where it should not. In most designs, water does the heavy lifting. Water is excellent at absorbing heat. It is common, cheap, and annoyingly good at staying liquid over a wide range of conditions, especially when you keep it under pressure. You can think of the coolant loop like circulation in a body, not poetic circulation, practical circulation. Pumps push water through pipes. Water picks up heat from the core, then carries it away to where it can be used, or where it can be transferred into another loop. On a submarine, the details vary by design, but the principle remains: keep heat moving. Do not let it stagnate. Do not let it concentrate. The system does not want hot spots. Hot spots lead to material stress, and material stress leads to letters being written to very serious people. So you watch flow rates. You watch pump performance. You listen to how a pump sounds when it is healthy. You learn the difference between a normal vibration and a vibration that means a bearing is unhappy. Your ears become instruments. Your eyes become instruments. Your attention becomes the most precious commodity on the boat. Because cooling is just heat being carried away, over and over, without rushing. The coolant picks up heat, then delivers it to a heat exchanger. That heat exchanger is like a quiet barter system. Heat is traded from one water loop to another without the waters mixing, because mixing is how you turn a manageable situation into paperwork. The hotter loop gives heat to the cooler loop through metal walls. The cooler loop warms, sometimes boils into steam, and that steam can drive turbines. The turbines do not care where the steam came from. Turbines are simple creatures. They want pressure and flow. They spin when steam rushes through, and their spinning becomes electricity through generators. So the reactor's job is to make heat. The plant's job is to move that heat. Your job is to make sure the moving never stops. This is where your imagination might try to sabotage you. It will picture dramatic failures, pipes bursting, steam everywhere, alarms, shouting. The cinematic version, the real threat, most days, is more boring. A small change, a subtle drift, a reading that is slightly off in a way only experienced eyes recognize. A pump that draws a little more current than it did yesterday. A temperature that climbs a fraction when it should not. The ocean above you is patient. It does not demand instant failure. It allows slow failure, the kind that develops quietly while you get used to it. So you learn to stay alert without panicking, which is a miserable human skill. Humans are built for bursts of attention. We are not built for calm vigilance for hours. We are not built to stare at stability and keep caring. And yet, that is the job. You keep temperature steady. You keep pressure steady. You keep your own decisions steady. You use the procedures not because you are incapable, but because your brain is unreliable, especially at 3 in the morning under artificial lights. The good operation feels boring. It feels like steady flow, steady temperatures, steady nerves. And because nothing stays perfect forever, the real skill becomes noticing small changes before they become big ones. That is the art of watching nothing happen. It sounds like an insult, but it is not. It is a discipline. It is the ability to look at a panel full of information and not let your eyes glaze over. It is the ability to respond to an alarm the way you respond to a knock at the door, not with terror, but with attention. Most alarms are not announcing disaster. They are early warnings. They are the system clearing its throat politely. It is saying, "Excuse me, this parameter is leaving its comfortable range." If you are wise, you treat that as a gift, because early warnings mean the system still has time, and time is what you buy with good design. Operators rely on checklists because tired brains love to skip steps. Your mind will tell you, you already know what to do. Your mind will say, just do the thing, you do it every day. Your mind is lying to you because your mind is always looking for shortcuts. A checklist is not there because you are stupid. It is there because you are human. You read the steps out loud. Sometimes you point to gauges. You confirm valve positions. You document changes. Not because you love paperwork, but because memory is a slippery substance in a place where days blend together, and you are always managing human limits. Sleep debt accumulates quietly, like dust. Stress sits in the body without making a sound. Boredom becomes its own kind of danger, because boredom is when attention goes soft. You can handle fear. Fear sharpens you. Boredom dissolves you, so you build rituals to stay sharp. You cross-check readings. You verify with another person. You rotate tasks. You move, stretch, sip water. You treat your own nervous system like another system that needs maintenance. Because it does. And then, inevitably, you meet the thing people fear most about reactors. Not heat, not pressure, not even machinery, but the invisible guest in the room. Radiation. People talk about radiation as if it is a spirit, as if it haunts places, as if it seeks you out. It does not. Radiation is simply energy traveling through space or matter. Sometimes it is light you can see. Sometimes it is energy you cannot see, coming from unstable atoms shedding pieces of themselves. On the submarine, you do not treat radiation like a horror story. You treat it like weather you never feel. You measure it constantly. You track it. You log it. You respect it the way you respect electricity, not because it is mystical, but because it is indifferent. Radiation can damage tissue when it deposits enough energy in cells to break molecular bonds. That is the plain, unromantic truth. It can hurt you the way a tiny hailstorm hurts a garden. Invisible impacts, accumulating damage. But the same universe that gives you hazards also gives you simple tools. Distance, time, shielding. Distance means if you are farther away, you receive less. Radiation spreads out, and space dilutes it. Time means less exposure if you spend less time near a source. Shielding means placing dense material between you and the source, so energy gets absorbed before it reaches you. These are not dramatic strategies. They are boring strategies. They are effective because physics is predictable when you stop romanticizing it. So, you wear dosimeters, devices that record exposure. You follow rules about where to stand and how long to stay. You treat certain spaces with special caution. And you keep the reactor sealed and shielded, so most of your relationship with radiation remains theoretical. Most of the work is prevention, keeping invisible things boring. And in that way, a submarine reactor operator is not so different from another kind of professional who works around radiation in bright rooms that still feel strangely quiet at night. Hospitals. The lighting is different, of course. Clean white instead of submarine red. The air smells like disinfectant instead of warm metal and recycled breath. The corridors are wider and there are windows somewhere, which feels decadent. But the mood can be similar in the late hours, quiet footsteps, low voices, machines humming steadily while someone tries to keep a human body within its safe limits. In medical imaging, radiation becomes a tool rather than a hazard. X-rays are a kind of light with more energy than the light your eyes can see. They pass through soft tissue more easily than they pass through bone, which is why bones show up so clearly on an image. You lie still, and the machine does its careful work. It sends a controlled pulse of energy through you, and detectors measure what comes out the other side. A picture is built from that pattern, like a shadow that contains information. A computed tomography scan, sometimes called a CT scan, takes many X-ray images from different angles, and a computer reconstructs a three-dimensional view. It is not magic. It is geometry, measurement, and patience. Magnetic resonance imaging, which people call MRI, is different. It uses strong magnetic fields and radio waves to coax signals from atoms in your body, especially hydrogen. The machine is loud because the physics is loud. Coils switching, forces moving, metal structures vibrating. You lie there, listening to rhythmic banging while your tissues quietly report their properties. And in radiation therapy, the goal is not to take a picture. The goal is to deliver enough energy to damage cancer cells more than the surrounding healthy cells. It is measured like medicine, enough to help, not more. The people who run these machines also live by checklists and calm rules. They also measure, verify, and document. They also keep the invisible things boring, because in both places, the wonder is not that humans can make powerful machines. The wonder is how often the body keeps working without asking permission. Your cells divide, your blood circulates, your lungs exchange gases, your nerves fire, your heart keeps time. And if you want a body to keep working in hard places, like underwater, you end up thinking a lot about air, pressure, and the simple chemistry of breathing. Down here, you learn something counterintuitive. Humans notice carbon dioxide buildup faster than they notice low oxygen. Oxygen can drop more than you would expect before you feel it clearly. But carbon dioxide makes itself known. That sensation of needing air is often the body reacting to carbon dioxide levels rising, not oxygen falling. Your brainstem monitors the chemistry of your blood, especially how acidic it becomes. When carbon dioxide rises, it forms carbonic acid in the blood, and the pH shifts. Your body does not enjoy that shift, so it urges you to breathe. This is why suffocation is not just about a lack of oxygen. It is also about drowning in your own carbon dioxide. On a submarine, this matters. You can generate oxygen, you can carry oxygen, you can produce it through chemical processes and carefully add it into the air. But if you do not remove carbon dioxide, everyone feels terrible, even if oxygen is technically adequate. So submarines scrub carbon dioxide. One common method uses chemicals that bind with carbon dioxide, trapping it. The details vary, but the idea is the same. The air passes through a system. Carbon dioxide is removed, and the air returns cleaner. It is like running your atmosphere through a filter over and over, because you cannot simply open a window and let the planet handle it. And while you are managing CO2, you are also managing humidity. Too much moisture, and everything feels damp, sticky, and uncomfortable. Too little, and your throat dries out, your skin cracks, and the air feels like it is stealing water from you. The body is picky. It is a gentle chemistry set that mostly wants steady conditions. So the boat gives you steady conditions, not perfect, but steady enough to function. That steadiness is the real miracle of submarines. Not the reactor, not the stealth, not the engineering bravado. The miracle is the ability to keep a small pocket of human life stable inside an environment that would happily crush and freeze it. Because outside the hull, the ocean does not care about your comfort. It presses in with slow, patient force. Pressure is the ocean's personality. It increases as you go deeper, and it does it without drama. It is like weight stacking quietly on your shoulders, a little more, then a little more, then more still. At the surface, you live under the pressure of the atmosphere. It is already substantial, even if you do not feel it. You are used to it because your body is built for it. But underwater, every additional depth adds more pressure because water is heavy and it does not compress much. So depth becomes a kind of math you feel if you ever leave the protection of the hull. Your ears would notice it first, your sinuses, your lungs, your soft tissues. The submarine hull exists to say no to that pressure, not heroically, not romantically. A submarine hull is built to handle compression because underwater pressure is trying to squeeze it inward. The hull is often cylindrical, because cylinders distribute stress well. Sharp corners are avoided because sharp corners concentrate stress. The hull is thick and it is made of strong materials, and it is reinforced because the ocean is not interested in your budget constraints. The deep water is cold, dark, and calm in a way that feels ancient. Sunlight fades quickly, swallowed by the sea. Temperatures drop. Life outside becomes sparse, strange, and adapted to pressures that would fold you like paper. And inside the boat, you pretend it is normal. You drink coffee, you eat meals, you read instruments, you do your checks. Being safe underwater is mostly about respecting boring limits. And it is the same with the reactor. It has limits, too. Temperature limits, pressure limits, neutron flux limits, chemistry limits. You operate within boundaries because boundaries are where survival lives. Now, keep that feeling for a moment. The feeling of a steady force pressing in and a structure holding it back. Because speaking of slow, patient forces, there is an even bigger one holding everything in place. Not just submarines, but before you zoom out to gravity and orbits, there is still one more calm piece of the reactor operator's world to sit with. The fact that all of this stability depends on your ability to keep noticing small changes. Your eyes start to do that slow, traitorous thing they always do on night watch. They slide off the important gauge and land on the familiar one, the comfortable one, the one that never changes much. And you think, for a moment, that your job is to stare at numbers until your shift ends. Wrong. Your job is to notice the shape of the numbers, the way they move, the way they hesitate, the way they lean. You are not watching a single temperature. You are watching how fast it rises when load increases. You are watching how long it takes to settle back down. You are watching whether a pump sounds just slightly more strained than yesterday, like a person trying to hide a cough. You are watching for the tiny difference between normal and the beginning of a story. And the boat is full of stories that start small, because anything that starts big is usually too late. In the control space, everything is designed to feel ordinary. Labels, colors, repeated layouts, a kind of intentional boredom. Because if every indicator looked dramatic, your brain would start ranking emergencies, like a child ranking monsters. But the reality is crueler and calmer. The worst problems are often the ones that arrive politely, with a mild alarm tone and a steady light. So you learn to treat alarms the way you treat a smoke smell in the kitchen. You do not scream, you do not ignore it. You locate it. An alarm is rarely a verdict. It is a question. What changed? Why did it change? Is it supposed to change? What do you do first without making it worse? Congratulations, you have entered the slow sport of not panicking. Because panic is just another kind of mechanical failure, except it happens inside your skull. It makes you skip steps. It makes you grab the first lever that looks helpful. It makes you confuse motion with progress. On a submarine, motion is easy. Progress is what you have to earn. That is why checklists exist, not as an insult, as a prosthetic for your attention. You read, you point, you verify, you speak confirmations out loud, because hearing your own voice makes it harder to hallucinate competence. You confirm valve positions, not once, but twice. You compare two instruments that measure the same thing, because sensors can lie and people can lie, and the universe lies constantly by leaving things out. The checklist does not trust you. It is right not to, because you are operating in a place where the penalty for imagination is often higher than the penalty for caution. It is also why there is usually another human involved, somebody cross-checking, somebody watching your hands, somebody prepared to say, "Stop, you skipped a line," not because they are your enemy, because they would like to keep living in this steel tube. Same as you. The strange intimacy of watchstanding is that you are never alone, even when it feels like you are. The boat is always listening. The systems are always reporting. The people in the next compartment are always sleeping, or eating, or thinking about home. And all of them are trusting you to keep the background from turning into the foreground. And the worst part is, they will never notice when you do it right. If you do your job perfectly, nothing happens. The lights stay on, the air stays breathable, the hull stays whole, the ocean stays outside, the reactor stays calm. You will not get applause, you will get another shift. That is the lifestyle. So you start building your own internal alarms. Not lights and tones, habits. You scan in patterns. You check certain instruments at certain intervals. You look away and look back because the eye gets blind to what it stares at too long. You write things down because your memory is a soft, wet substance, and the submarine is not interested in soft, wet substances. You track trends. You compare now to 10 minutes ago. You compare this watch to last watch, and you learn a very submarine lesson. Boredom is not the absence of danger. Boredom is the camouflage danger wears, so you do not notice it. Fatigue helps it. Fatigue makes you generous to anomalies. You start saying, "It is probably fine." You start saying, "It has always done that." You start saying, "I will check it in a minute." And a minute down here can be a whole personality. So the system tries to save you from yourself. It builds in redundancy. It builds in interlocks, those little rules that say you cannot do this unless that is true. It builds in automatic responses for certain conditions, because machines are not brave, but they are consistent. Still, consistency is not intelligence. It is just repetition without emotion. That is why the human is there. You are there to interpret. You are there to decide whether a weird reading is a sensor drifting or a real physical change. You are there to decide whether to slow down, to hold steady, to call someone, to stop something before it becomes expensive. You are there to do the kind of thinking that is incredibly hard when you are tired. And when you are tired, your body starts doing its own quiet sabotage. Reaction times stretch. Small tasks start feeling heavy. Your eyes sting in dry, processed air. Your brain starts craving novelty, which is a hilarious request in a place designed to avoid novelty. So you manage yourself like another system. Hydration, food, stretching, handoffs, short mental resets. A routine so boring it becomes protective, because the submarine is an argument against improvisation. And now, since you are thinking like an operator, you start to see the boat as a set of systems that do not forgive each other. A problem in one place becomes a different problem in another. Heat affects pressure. Pressure affects flow. Flow affects cooling. Cooling affects material stress. Material stress affects leak probability. Leaks affect chemistry. Chemistry affects corrosion. Corrosion affects reliability. reliability affects your sleep. Everything is connected, like a nightmare family reunion. And speaking of what you cannot see, but must respect, there is that invisible guest again. Radiation. Not as a spooky word, but as a measurable thing that obeys rules. On the boat, radiation safety is not a single dramatic moment. It is a lifestyle of small behaviors. You wear your dosimeter. It records your dose the way a pedometer records steps. Not because you are training for anything, because you want a record for later when someone asks what you did and where you were. You follow postings, those signs that tell you what level of radiation might exist in an area and what you need to do about it. You limit time near sources. You maximize distance. You make sure shielding is in place. Time, distance, shielding, the three most boring words that keep your tissues from becoming a science project. And the fun part, if you enjoy mild dread, is that radiation is not one thing. It is several things wearing the same name. There are alpha particles, heavy and clumsy. They cannot travel far, and a sheet of paper can stop them. They are not scary until they are inside you, because inside you, that heavy energy dumps itself into delicate cells like a bowling ball dropped onto glassware. There are beta particles, faster and lighter. They can penetrate a bit more. They are like tiny, angry insects that can get into places if you let them. And there are gamma rays, which are like very energetic light. They are penetrating. They do not care much about thin barriers. They can pass through you and keep going, leaving little packets of energy behind. That is why shielding for gamma is often dense, thick, and unromantic. And then there are neutrons, those quiet troublemakers again. Neutrons can be particularly annoying because they interact differently with matter. They can make other materials radioactive by being absorbed, a process called activation. Translation: neutrons can turn your surroundings into a temporary problem if you do not plan carefully. So a reactor plant is built with neutron absorbers, shielding layers, water, and heavy structures. It is designed to keep neutron behavior inside the places it belongs. It is designed to keep the rest of the ship boring. Which is the theme. A good nuclear boat is a boat where radiation is mostly paperwork, not sensation. You do not feel it. You do not see it. You confirm it with instruments and treat it like a number you never want to romanticize. And you also learn the emotional truth. People fear what they cannot sense. It is why you can stand next to a loud machine without anxiety, because the noise feels honest. Radiation is silent. It does not announce itself. So the mind writes horror stories. Down here, you do not have the luxury of horror stories. You have procedures. You have meters. You have the slow comfort of controlled exposure. Because there is a difference between danger and chaos. A submarine can tolerate danger. It cannot tolerate chaos. And you start to realize something a little insulting about human life. So much of your survival depends on invisible numbers staying in invisible ranges. Oxygen percentage, carbon dioxide concentration, humidity, temperature, reactor power, coolant flow, dose rate. Your body is a democracy of chemistry. It votes every second. The boat is a dictatorship of physics. It enforces rules continuously. Now, if you take that mindset and carry it out of the reactor plant, you can see why medicine feels oddly familiar. A hospital is also full of invisible ranges: blood oxygen saturation, carbon dioxide levels in a ventilated patient, electrolytes, pH, heart rhythms, dosage schedules. The machines are different, but the vibe is similar: steady lights, quiet alarms, tired humans, and a constant negotiation with what the body will tolerate. In medical imaging, you become the object being measured. You lie still, and the machine does not care about your thoughts. It cares about signal. In an X-ray, photons pass through you. Dense materials like bone absorb more of them, so fewer photons reach the detector. The image is basically a map of what blocked the light, a shadow that tells the truth. In a computed tomography scan, the machine rotates around you, taking many thin slices. A computer reconstructs a three-dimensional view by combining those slices. It is like building a loaf of bread out of bread slices, except the loaf is your insides, and you do not get to taste it. And in magnetic resonance imaging, the machine uses a strong magnetic field to align certain atomic nuclei, mostly hydrogen protons. Then it nudges them with radio waves and listens as they relax back. Different tissues relax differently. The scanner hears that and turns it into contrast. It feels like magic because you do not spend your days thinking about hydrogen in your water molecules, but your body is full of water, and water is full of hydrogen, and hydrogen is surprisingly talkative under the right conditions. The sound of an MRI is the sound of electromagnetic forces pushing and pulling on coils. It is loud because the machine is doing rapid changes, and rapid changes have consequences. It is a reminder that even quiet science can be mechanically violent. Radiation therapy is different again. It is not about pictures. It is about controlled damage. Cancer cells divide rapidly, often with less careful repair mechanisms. Radiation damages DNA, directly or indirectly through reactive molecules. If the cell cannot repair the damage, it cannot divide properly. That is the idea. Of course, healthy cells can also be damaged. So, therapy is planned carefully. Angles, beams, fractions of dose delivered over time. The goal is to concentrate harm where it helps and spread it out where it would hurt. Congratulations, you have invented a form of healing that is basically targeted injury, and it works. Often because the body is resilient in ways that feel unfair, considering how fragile it is in others. Now, take that idea of the body as a system you can support with machines and bring it back underwater. Because if you want humans to function inside a sealed tube, you end up supporting the most basic system of all: breathing. You already know the cruel joke: your body notices CO2 rising before it notices oxygen falling. That is why the urge to breathe is more about carbon dioxide and acidity than about oxygen itself. CO2 dissolves in blood, forms carbonic acid, and shifts the pH. Your brainstem senses that shift and tells you to breathe more. It is a simple feedback loop, and it is ancient. So the submarine manages the atmosphere like a careful accountant. Oxygen can be stored or generated. One method uses electrolysis, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen with electricity. Oxygen is kept, hydrogen is dealt with carefully, because hydrogen is energetic in ways that do not respect your desire for quiet. The oxygen is added back into the air in controlled amounts, not dumped, not guessed. Controlled. Carbon dioxide is removed with scrubbers. Often, chemical absorbents are used. Air is pulled through beds of material that bind CO2. Those beds eventually saturate and need regeneration or replacement. Some systems use amines, some use other compounds. The details matter to engineers. What matters to you is the feeling that air can be cleaned like laundry, used, saturated, refreshed, reused again. And humidity is managed because humans are basically warm, damp machines. You exhale water vapor, you sweat, you cook, you shower if your boat allows it. Moisture builds. Too much humidity makes everything feel clammy. It encourages corrosion. It encourages mold. It makes the air feel heavy. Too little dries your mucous membranes, those protective wet surfaces in your nose and throat. It makes you more prone to irritation and infection. It makes sleep worse. It makes you feel vaguely annoyed at nothing, which is a risky emotion in a tube full of other annoyed humans. So the boat dehumidifies or humidifies as needed. It uses cooling coils to condense water out of air. It drains it away. It keeps the atmosphere in a narrow comfort band, not because comfort is a luxury, but because discomfort becomes distraction, and distraction becomes error, and error becomes ocean. There are other atmospheric concerns too, because a sealed environment is a chemistry experiment that never ends. There are trace contaminants, solvents, fuels, cleaning chemicals, off-gassing from materials, tiny leaks from systems, the smell of machine oil that never quite leaves. So air purification is layered. Filters for particles, activated carbon for some chemicals, catalytic converters for certain gases, monitoring equipment to track what might drift upward in concentration. It is not romantic. It is maintenance. It is the slow refusal to be poisoned by your own habitat. And while all this is happening, you are living at a pressure close to surface pressure inside the hull. The pressure outside climbs with depth, but inside you keep it stable because humans like being the same shape they were born as. That stable internal pressure is a gift the hull provides. Outside the hull, the ocean stacks weight on you with indifferent patience. Every increase in depth adds more pressure. Water is heavy, and the column above you does not forget you are there. At a certain depth, the pressure is like having a truck parked on every square inch. But you never need to picture numbers. The sensation is enough. The knowledge that if the hull fails, it will not be a leak. It will be an instant decision by physics. Implosion is not dramatic in the way movies show. It is fast. It is violent. It is over before your nervous system finishes sending the message of surprise. The hull is built to prevent that, using shapes and materials chosen for compression. A cylinder is friendly to pressure. A sphere is even better, which is why deep-sea submersibles often use spherical pressure vessels. But submarines need to be long and functional, so they compromise with strong cylinders and reinforced structures. The steel is thick. The welds are scrutinized. The boat is tested not because engineers are optimistic, but because they are pessimists with calculators. And that pessimism keeps you alive. The deeper you go, the darker it gets. Light disappears quickly in water. First red light fades, then orange, then yellow. Eventually, everything is blue. And then everything is black. Temperature drops. The water becomes a cold that feels ancient, a cold that has had centuries to settle. The ocean at depth is calm in a way that feels wrong. No waves, no weather, just slow currents and the weight of the planet. Inside the boat, you replace nature with systems, artificial light, controlled air, heated compartments, scheduled meals. Your circadian rhythm, that old animal clock, tries to interpret this and fails. So you become a creature of routine. And routine, again, is a form of shielding, not from radiation, but from your own mind. Now, pressure is not only an ocean thing, it is a physics thing. Pressure is what happens when a force spreads across an area. It is the same concept in your bloodstream, in your lungs, in a hydraulic system, and in the ocean, trying to squeeze your home into a smaller shape. The boat is full of pressure boundaries, pipes that hold pressurized water, steam lines that hold hot vapor trying to expand, tanks holding gases, valves and seals keeping fluids where they belong. Every boundary is a promise. Every promise must be maintained because fluids are opportunists. They will leave their containers through any path available. They will exploit tiny flaws. They will turn microscopic imperfections into leaks. And leaks in a submarine are a kind of betrayal. So you monitor pressure like you monitor mood in a fragile group. You notice spikes. You notice drops. You notice slow drifts. You ask what changed. Pressure drops can mean a leak. Pressure spikes can mean a blockage or overheating. Either way, pressure is information. And because the reactor plant is a heat machine, pressure is inseparable from temperature. Heat a fluid and it wants to expand. Confine it and pressure rises. Let it expand and it can do work like pushing a piston or spinning a turbine. So your whole propulsion and electrical system is basically a controlled argument between temperature and pressure. You make heat with fission. That heat raises temperature in a primary coolant. The primary coolant transfers heat to a secondary loop, often producing steam. Steam expands and rushes through turbines. Turbines spin. Generators convert that rotation into electricity. Condensers cool the steam back into water, and pumps send it around again. The cycle is steady. The cycle is boring. The cycle is your life. The specific design on a submarine is compact and engineered for stealth and reliability. Everything is built to run quietly. Flow paths are designed to reduce noise. Machinery is mounted to reduce vibration transmission. Even your footsteps are part of the acoustic picture because sound is how people find things underwater. The boat listens to the ocean, and the ocean listens back. Noise is not just annoyance. Noise is risk. So you learn that quiet is a performance. It is not a lack of activity. It is carefully managed activity. Pumps may be designed for low noise. Valves are operated smoothly. Doors are closed gently. Tools are set down carefully. People speak softly, not out of politeness, but out of habit. Habit outlives the reason, which is convenient. And this is where your cynicism gets to be useful, because you stop believing in heroism and you start believing in margins. Margins are where safety lives. A little extra cooling capacity, a little extra shielding, backup power, redundant sensors, alternative pathways, extra procedures, extra training. The boat is a shrine to redundancy. It has backups for backups because the ocean does not care what you meant to do. It only cares what you did and what happened next. So you practice casualty drills, not because you enjoy imagining failure, but because you want failure to feel familiar. Familiarity makes your hands steadier. Familiarity makes your voice calm. Familiarity makes you less likely to do something creative. Creativity is for painting, not for reactor operations. And yet, even with all that training, the human mind remains the weak link. Which is why the culture around watchstanding matters so much. You are encouraged to speak up. You are encouraged to question. You are encouraged to call for help early, because embarrassment is cheaper than catastrophe. If you are lucky, the people around you have learned that lesson the easy way. If you are unlucky, they learned it the hard way. From stories and memorials and manuals written in the blood ink of hindsight. So you keep your ego small, you keep your attention large. And now, with that in mind, you can understand why radiation safety is treated as mundane. Because radiation is not a moment, it is a budget. Dose is accumulated, exposure is counted, limits are set. Work is planned to minimize time in higher dose areas. Shielding is placed. Tools are used to increase distance. Tasks are rehearsed to reduce time spent near sources. It is like doing a chore in a cold room. You plan your steps. You do not stand around thinking. You do not linger. You get in, do the task, get out, not because you are afraid, but because efficiency is kindness to your future selves. Your body will not thank you later. Your body does not know how, but it will be less broken. And now, if you zoom out just slightly, you start to see a theme across all these environments: submarines, hospitals, reactor plants. Humans survive by building little islands of controlled conditions in a universe that does not provide them. You create stable temperatures. You create breathable air. You create manageable pressures. You create predictable routines. You keep the invisible things within limits. And outside your island, nature continues being nature. The ocean presses. The planet pulls. The sun radiates. The atoms decay. The good news is that these forces are predictable. The bad news is that they are predictable, because it means they never get tired, they never get bored, they never take a day off. You do. So you rest your survival on procedures and instruments and teams and training, because your own mind is a temporary solution. Now, let us drift back into the most physical force the submarine teaches you to respect: pressure. Pressure is not just a number on a gauge. It is a sensation you can imagine in your bones. Imagine the hull as a hand held shut, constantly. Imagine the ocean as a slow, patient fist. The hull is not fighting. It is simply resisting, continuously, without getting credit. That is why hull design is so obsessed with avoiding stress concentrations. A small flaw in a high-stress area can grow. Cracks propagate. Metal fatigue accumulates. It is the same story as human fatigue, just with different materials and fewer excuses. So submarines undergo inspections, maintenance periods, and testing. They are not just driven until they break, at least not intentionally. The hull is a life-critical structure. You treat it like you treat your own heart. You monitor, you maintain. You do not gamble casually. And you also respect depth limits. The boat has a test depth, a maximum safe operating depth, and beyond that, the unknown. You do not go deeper because you feel like it. You go deeper because the mission requires it, and because engineering says it is tolerable. That is the bargain. Deep water is not just pressure either. It is also temperature. Cold water conducts heat away. The ocean is a giant heat sink. That can be useful. It can also be a problem because systems lose heat. People feel cold, and condensation forms where warm, humid air meets cold surfaces. Condensation is another quiet enemy. It encourages corrosion. It creates electrical issues. It makes surfaces slippery. It turns a controlled environment into a damp one. So, you manage temperature gradients. You insulate. You ventilate. You keep air moving so it does not settle into cold corners like a sulk. Air movement is a constant on a submarine. It keeps temperature even. It keeps CO2 mixed so it can be scrubbed. It keeps humidity from pooling. It reduces the feeling of stagnation. It is also a sound. Always. The boat never stops breathing. And now, after hours of managing invisible air chemistry, and invisible radiation, and invisible neutron behavior, you can appreciate something about humans. You are unbelievably dependent on things you cannot directly sense. You cannot feel oxygen percentage precisely. You cannot feel dose rate. You cannot feel neutron flux. You cannot feel carbon dioxide concentration until it is already bothering you. You cannot feel hull stress, so you use proxies, instruments, procedures, culture. You turn uncertainty into measurement. And once you begin to trust measurement, you begin to see the universe differently. You begin to see it as a place where the same force can be gentle and deadly, depending on scale and context. Pressure in your blood vessels keeps you alive. Pressure outside your hull can end you instantly. Radiation in a medical scan can diagnose disease. Radiation in uncontrolled exposure can cause disease. Heat in a reactor can power a city. Heat in the wrong place can melt metal and make a mess of everybody's week. Everything is a tool until it is a weapon, usually accidentally. And speaking of tools that become weapons, let us return briefly to the reactor operator's relationship with time. On a surface ship, if something goes wrong, you might have options. You can stop. You can vent. You can call for help. You can open things. You can get fresh air. You can evacuate. On a submarine, many of those options are expensive or impossible. You cannot just open a hatch and let the pressure equalize. You cannot just dump steam into the atmosphere without consequences. You cannot just call for immediate rescue in many situations because stealth and location are part of survival. So the operator learns to value early detection. Early detection is time. Time is options. And options are what keep you alive. So you watch for the subtle signs of degraded performance. You watch for the hint of a leak, not the flood. You watch for the hint of overheating, not the steam cloud. You watch for the hint of chemistry drift, not the corrosion failure. Chemistry drift, by the way, is its own quiet universe. Water in reactor systems is not just water. It is water with rules. The chemistry of coolant matters because water can carry impurities. Impurities can become corrosive. Corrosion can produce particles. Particles can erode surfaces. Surfaces can fail. So water purity is monitored. Conductivity, pH, dissolved oxygen, the presence of certain ions, the presence of corrosion products. In many systems, you want water that is very pure because ions in water make it conductive, and conductivity can indicate contamination. Pure water is oddly aggressive too, because it wants to dissolve things to reach equilibrium. So you control chemistry carefully to reduce corrosion and keep materials stable. You add specific chemicals in controlled ways. You remove impurities with filters and demineralizers. You sample and analyze. It is like keeping an aquarium for invisible fish, except the fish are nuclear heat and the aquarium is made of high-grade metal. And every time you take a sample, you are performing a small act of humility. You are admitting you cannot just assume the system is fine. You have to check. Checking is love in engineering language. Now, let us take a step out of the reactor space again and feel the larger environment pressing around it. The ocean is a fluid, and fluid mechanics is the quiet mathematics behind so much of your existence down here. Flow through pipes, flow around the hull, flow of air through ducts, flow of heat through metals, flow of electricity through wires. The hull moves through water, and water does not move aside politely. It resists. That resistance is drag. Drag means you need propulsion power. Propulsion power means you need heat. Heat means you need cooling. Cooling means you need flow. And flow means you need pumps. Everything circles back. Even your stealth depends on fluid dynamics. Cavitation, for example, is the formation of vapor bubbles in a fluid when pressure drops locally, often around propeller blades. Those bubbles collapse and create noise. Noise is detectable. Noise is risk, so submarine propellers are designed to reduce cavitation. Speeds and depths are chosen to minimize it. The boat is operated in ways that keep the ocean from hearing it too clearly. You might think stealth is about hiding. Really, it is about not making the ocean flinch. And the reactor plant, again, is part of that. Machinery noise must be controlled. Vibration isolated. Flow paths smoothed. A quiet reactor is not just a comfort, it is a tactical feature, which is a strange thought. Your ability to stay alive sometimes depends on how politely your pumps behave. Congratulations! You are living in a world where manners are physics. Now, as you carry all this in your mind, you can begin to sense the next bigger transition approaching. You have been thinking about pressure, about invisible forces, about systems that hold back the environment. There is a deeper force than pressure, one that makes pressure possible in the first place, one that holds oceans to planets and planets to stars, gravity. But you do not need to jump there yet, not abruptly. The mind likes a bridge. So here is the bridge. The way a submarine navigates depth is the way an object navigates a gravity field. It is all about buoyancy and balance. A submarine is not simply heavy. It is carefully adjustable. Buoyancy is the upward force a fluid exerts on an object, equal to the weight of the fluid displaced. That is Archimedes, still haunting your engineering centuries later. Translation: if you displace enough water, the water pushes you up with enough force to balance your weight. A submarine controls buoyancy with ballast tanks. Fill tanks with air and you are lighter relative to the water, so you rise. Flood tanks with water and you become heavier, so you sink. But it is not just sink and rise. It is trim. It is balance front to back. It is keeping the boat level so it moves like a controlled animal, not like a dropped wrench. Trim tanks help adjust the distribution of water and weight. Control surfaces help steer up and down while moving forward, like underwater wings. So you are not really floating in the casual sense. You are constantly negotiating forces, weight downward, buoyancy upward, lift from control surfaces, drag resisting motion. It is all balanced constantly by people who would rather be asleep. And the weird part is how similar this is to orbiting. Orbit is also a negotiation of forces. Gravity pulls inward. Velocity carries you forward. You fall around a planet instead of straight into it. You keep missing the ground because the ground curves away. It is falling with style. It is falling forever until something changes. A submarine is like that in miniature. It is always falling in a medium, always corrected, always kept within safe margins. And if you are hearing the shape of the next topic now, good. That means your mind is doing what it does best, linking patterns. Speaking of patterns, you can feel them in your body too. Down here, your sleep becomes segmented. Your hunger follows the schedule, not the sun. Your mood drifts in cycles tied to watches and meals. The boat becomes your planet. And yet, even while the boat replaces the sky, the fundamental physics does not change. The same gravity that makes your coffee sit in the mug is the gravity that makes the ocean sit on the hull. The same gravity that gives you weight is the gravity that makes pressure increase with depth. Pressure is the ocean's way of translating gravity into a sensation because the weight of all that water is being pulled downward. And the deeper you go, the more water is above you. More weight, more pressure. It is gravity made tactile. So when you eventually zoom out to orbits and moons and long nights, you are not leaving the submarine behind. You are just changing scale. For now, you stay with this, the boat as a controlled bubble inside a crushing environment. The operator as a tired mind, keeping invisible numbers inside invisible limits. And you let the systems hum, because that hum is physics behaving, for the moment, exactly as predicted. And then, just to keep you humble, physics reminds you that prediction is not the same thing as control. Control is what you do with prediction, while your eyelids get heavier. Because the boat does not reward you for knowing. It rewards you for not drifting. You are still on watch, still staring at a system that looks steady, and your brain keeps trying to turn steady into invisible. That is the oldest human failure mode. The assumption that because something has behaved, it will continue behaving. The ocean above you loves that assumption. It feeds on it. So you keep scanning, not for fireworks, but for whispers. A slight change in coolant temperature that arrives too early. A pressure that settles a little higher than it did last watch. A flow reading that flickers like a tired eyelid. None of these are disasters. Not yet. They are the beginning of a branching path. In training, they told you to respect the boring anomalies. The little ones. The ones that tempt you to ignore them because you want your shift to stay quiet. Those are the ones that grow up into meetings. And one of the quietest forces behind all these numbers is gravity, doing what it always does, pulling everything down with patient consistency. You do not often think about gravity on a submarine, Because gravity feels like furniture. It is always there, holding your boots to the deck plates. It is the reason coffee stays in the mug. It is the reason spilled coolant does not politely hover in the air for easy cleanup. But gravity is also the reason the ocean has heavy water pressing down, building pressure with depth. Gravity is why fluids stratify, why hot water rises, why cold water sinks, why air pockets are where you think they are. Gravity writes the rules and then lets you pretend you invented them. Now, you are going to zoom out, slowly, not with a dramatic camera pull, but with the kind of mental drift that happens when you stare at the same panel too long. The needles are steady. The hum is steady. Your thoughts start reaching outward, looking for something new to chew on. So you let them. Gravity is the quiet rule that keeps feet on floors and moons in place. It is the same force that makes your shoulders slump when you are tired. It is the same force that makes the ocean press on your hull. It is also a force you can cheat a little if you move fast enough sideways. That is what an orbit is, a cheat, a loophole. You think orbit means floating, peaceful, weightless, gentle. Wrong. Orbit is falling around a planet so continuously that you never hit it. It is missing the ground on purpose. If you were outside the submarine, you would feel the ocean as pressure. If you were in orbit, you would feel gravity as a constant fall. The sensation is different. The math is the same. Gravity pulls inward. Your sideways velocity carries you forward. If the forward motion is just right, the surface curves away beneath you at the same rate you fall. You keep falling, and the planet keeps politely getting out of the way. Congratulations! You have become a professional ground misser. The comforting part is that this is not a special trick reserved for astronauts. The same logic applies to a rock thrown sideways, if you could throw it fast enough. It applies to the moon. It applies to satellites. It applies to rings around planets. It applies to dust. Even your submarine, in a very unromantic way, is constantly negotiating a balance of forces. Weight down, buoyancy up, lift from control surfaces, drag from the water. Everything is a tug-of-war you keep from becoming a tantrum. The universe loves balancing acts, not because it is fair, because it is efficient. So let us take the boat you live in and mentally lift it out of the ocean. You do not need to imagine it breaking the surface with triumph. Just imagine it as a mass, a dense shape, a collection of atoms with a center of gravity. Gravity does not care what shape you are. It only cares where your mass is. And a planet is just that idea, scaled up, until it becomes a place. The Earth pulls everything toward its center. You know this in your bones. You also know it in the way fluids behave. Pressure in the ocean rises with depth because the water above has weight. Weight exists because gravity pulls on mass. The same goes for air. You live under an ocean of air, and you forget because it is transparent and you are spoiled. Air has weight. It presses down. Your body is built to resist it, and so you call it normal. But in the submarine, you keep the inside air near the pressure your body expects. That means the hull is resisting the outside pressure. The hull is a boundary between two different weight columns. Outside, a tall column of water, heavy, relentless. Inside, a smaller column of air, light, manageable. It is a disagreement resolved by steel. Now, If you go high enough above the Earth, the air thins until it stops acting like a continuous blanket. The pressure drops, molecules spread out. There is no comforting shove against your skin. And in that region, gravity is still there. It never left. It is weaker than at the surface, but not by some dramatic factor. Not even close. Astronauts are not weightless because gravity is gone. They are weightless because everything around them is falling together. The spacecraft is falling. The astronaut is falling. The air inside is falling. They are all sharing the same downward acceleration, so nobody feels a support force pushing back. No floor pushing on your feet. No chair pushing on your spine. That support force is what you call weight. Take it away, and your body feels like it has been excused from its usual burden, even though gravity is still doing its work. And your body reacts, not with peace, but with confusion. Because without weight, your fluids shift upward. Blood moves toward your head. Your face can puff a little. Your legs can feel empty. Your inner ear, designed to interpret gravity as a reference, starts giving you nonsense. Your muscles begin to relax in ways that become weakness. Your bones, which normally remodel themselves under the stress of supporting you, start losing density. Your body is economical. If you do not use bone strength, it stops paying for it. Nature is not sentimental. It is an accountant. So in orbit, you exercise not for vanity, but to keep your skeleton from quietly dissolving its savings account. You strap yourself to treadmills. You pull against resistance machines. You sweat in a place where sweat becomes floating droplets if you are careless. You learn that the human body is not designed for space. It is designed for a planet that insists on pulling you down. And if you think that is dramatic, remember, you already live in a place where the environment would kill you instantly. Without engineering, space is just more honest about it. Underwater, the hazard is pressure crushing you. In space, the hazard is pressure leaving you. Congratulations! The universe has two ways to ruin your day, and they are opposites. In vacuum, the air in your lungs wants to expand. Water in your saliva can start to boil at body temperature, not because it is hot, but because the pressure is low. Your blood does not boil like a pot because your body has internal pressure, but exposed fluids can. And the real issue is oxygen, not the lack of air movement, not cold, not silence. Oxygen. You have maybe seconds of useful consciousness if you suddenly lose pressure and oxygen, not because you explode, but because your brain is needy. It burns energy constantly, and it wants oxygen delivered like a subscription service. The good news is, you probably will not feel fear for very long. The bad news is, that is not comforting. It is just fast, so you start to appreciate your submarine again. It is an engineered atmosphere. It is a little planet with its own rules, built by people who understood that humans are soft and negotiable. And speaking of negotiable, gravity is negotiable too, if you know how to fall. Orbits are not circles by default. A perfect circle is a special case, like a perfectly even slice of bread. Most orbits are ellipses, stretched circles. Objects speed up when they are closer to what they orbit, and slow down when they are farther away. This is not a moral lesson. It is conservation of energy and angular momentum. Translation: if you are a human, if you fall inward, you pick up speed like a skateboarder in a halfpipe. If you climb outward, you lose speed. The universe does not give you free motion. It trades. And if you add a little push in the direction you are moving, your orbit changes. It becomes higher on the far side. If you push against your direction of travel, your orbit drops. The timing matters. Spaceflight is less like driving a car and more like nudging a shopping cart on a moving walkway while everything is also falling. It is counterintuitive and it punishes impulsiveness, which is why it feels familiar to you, the submarine operator, because both jobs are about anticipating delays. In a reactor plant, you make a change and wait for heat to move and systems to respond. In orbit mechanics, you make a change and wait for the geometry of motion to play out. You do not get instant results. You get consequences on schedule. And since you are a creature trying to sleep, consequences on schedule are already your whole life. Gravity also gives you tides, which is another slow, boring force that does not care about your plans. Tides are not just the ocean sloshing. They are the earth being gently stretched by the gravity of the moon and sun. The moon pulls more on the near side of Earth than the far side because gravity weakens with distance. That difference creates a stretching force. So you get two bulges, one facing the moon and one on the opposite side. The Earth rotates and coastlines move through those bulges. Water levels rise and fall. It is a planet being kneaded slowly twice a day. And tides matter underwater too, even when you cannot see them. They drive currents. They change sound propagation. They affect where layers of temperature and salinity sit. Those layers are another quiet ocean truth. The sea is not uniform. It is stratified. Warm water tends to sit above cold water. Fresher water can sit above saltier water. These layers form boundaries that can bend sound, like lenses bending light. Sound in the ocean does not just travel in straight lines. It refracts. It curves towards slower regions. Temperature, salinity, and pressure all influence the speed of sound in water. So when your submarine listens, it is listening through a medium that is not honest. The ocean distorts the message, which is convenient and dangerous, depending on who else is listening. Now, there is a calm comfort in all this, if you are willing to accept it. The comfort is that physics is consistent. It does not change its mood. It does not suddenly decide that today, gravity is optional. You can build a life around consistency. You can build a boat around it. You can build an orbit around it. What you cannot build around is your own attention, because attention is the fragile part. So let us loop back to you, not as a person in a steel tube, but as a nervous system trying to stay reliable in a universe that runs on boring repetition. Your brain is a prediction machine. It loves patterns. It loves to automate. Automation is how you survive without thinking about every heartbeat. But automation is also how you miss small changes. So you train yourself to break your own automation. You force yourself to look at the gauges in a set pattern. You force yourself to verbalize. You force yourself to treat normal as something you must re-earn every few minutes. This is exhausting. That is why you would not last a day. Not because you cannot understand fission, not because you cannot learn procedures, but because the job is to remain mentally present in a room where presence feels unnecessary. And that is the deeper lesson that applies everywhere. In submarines, in hospitals, in spacecraft, in power grids. Modern life is a series of systems that require humans to supervise stability, not to create it, to maintain it. And you are not built for maintenance. You are built for stories. So you make stories out of maintenance. You call it watchstanding. You call it operations. You call it duty. You call it professionalism. You dress it up with patches and pins and jargon. But at 3 in the morning, it is still you, staring at a needle, forcing your mind to care. Now gravity, at least, helps you here. Gravity makes fluids behave in predictable ways. It makes convection happen. Convection is the movement of fluid driven by density differences. Hot fluid is less dense, so it rises. Cold fluid is denser, so it sinks. That circulation moves heat around. In your reactor plant, convection matters. In some situations, you can rely on natural circulation, where heat makes coolant move even without pumps. It is not always enough for every condition, but it can be a safety feature. Nature occasionally assists, not out of kindness, out of physics. So, the design of cooling systems often respects natural circulation paths. It avoids traps where hot fluid could get stuck. It ensures that if pumps stop, there is still a way for heat to migrate. This is the kind of thinking that keeps you alive, not dramatic hero thinking, just quiet geometry and gravity and heat. Heat wants to spread. Gravity wants to stratify. Fluids want to flow from high pressure to low pressure. The design is about letting these urges do useful work, not destructive work. And as you sit with that idea, you can see it in orbit too. Orbits are also about letting gravity do what it does and using small inputs to guide it. A spacecraft does not fight gravity continuously. That would be expensive. It works with it. A submarine does not fight pressure by pushing back harder with some active force. It simply has a hull strong enough to hold the boundary. It works with pressure by respecting depth limits and using buoyancy to move, rather than brute force. This is what engineering looks like when it grows up. It stops trying to dominate nature. It starts negotiating with it. Now, there is another slow force that feels like gravity's cousin, and you have already met it over and over tonight. Entropy. Entropy is one of those words people use to sound intelligent at parties. Down here, you use it to explain why everything breaks if you stop paying attention. Entropy is the tendency for energy to spread out, for systems to move toward disorder, for differences to even out. Heat flows from hot to cold. Pressure equalizes. Chemicals mix. Batteries discharge. Metal corrodes. Bearings wear. Nothing stays neatly arranged unless you spend energy keeping it that way. Your submarine is an entropy-fighting machine. The reactor produces energy, and you spend that energy to pump fluids, scrub air, run electronics, move the boat, and keep humans comfortable enough to avoid mistakes. Comfort is not luxury. Comfort is stability. Your body is also an entropy-fighting machine. You burn food to maintain your temperature, repair your tissues, keep your brain running. Sleep is part of that maintenance. It is when your brain does its janitorial work, clearing metabolites, reorganizing memories, tuning itself. It is also when you stop supervising the world, and that can feel unsafe unless you trust the systems. Down here, trust is complicated. Trust is built on redundancy, procedure, and proof. So you do not trust the reactor because it is noble. You trust it because it is designed with margins, maintained with care, and monitored with instruments. You trust it because it has been boring for a very long time. Boring is the highest compliment you can give a complex system. Now, let us sit in orbit again for a moment, because orbit has its own version of boring danger. In space, there is debris, tiny pieces of metal and paint and old satellites moving faster than bullets. Even a fleck can be lethal at orbital speeds, because kinetic energy scales with the square of speed. Translation: fast makes small into deadly. So spacecraft are shielded, not with thick walls, because mass is expensive, but with clever layers. Whipple shields, for example, use a thin outer layer that breaks up an incoming particle, spreading the impact over a wider area before it hits the main wall. It is armor designed for sandblasting at absurd speeds. And just like on a submarine, you track the environment constantly. You monitor. You predict conjunctions, close passes. You perform avoidance maneuvers. Most days, nothing happens. That is the goal. But you never stop checking, because space, like the ocean, is a place that rewards complacency with consequences. And orbits decay too. Not because gravity gets bored, but because there is still a whisper of atmosphere in low orbit. Molecules up there are sparse, but at high speed, even sparse molecules cause drag. Drag steals energy. The orbit slowly drops. So satellites need occasional boosts, or they eventually re-enter and burn. The sky is not stable. It is managed. This is the part people do not like to hear. They want the heavens to be eternal. They want orbits to be clean and permanent. But the universe is a leaky system. Everything decays. Everything drifts. Even the moon is drifting away from Earth by about the rate your fingernails grow. Tidal interactions transfer energy and angular momentum. The Earth's rotation slowly slows. Days lengthen over geological time. Time itself is a kind of maintenance problem. And that brings you back to the submarine again, because underwater, time is also strange. Without sunrise, your sense of day is enforced by schedule. Meals become clock signals. Watch rotations become seasons. The boat becomes a closed world with its own artificial rhythm. Your body still tries to run on a circadian cycle. Hormones rise and fall. Temperature changes subtly. Alertness comes and goes, but the cycle can desynchronize. Some people adjust. Some people never fully do. You can end up tired in a way sleep does not fix quickly, because your body is sleeping at the wrong biological times. This is why light matters. Bright light can signal daytime to the brain. Dim light signals night. Submarines often use lighting schemes to help, but the environment is still unnatural. You are a surface animal pretending to be a deep sea one. And now that you have spent so much time thinking about gravity and steady forces, you can appreciate one of the most comforting ideas in physics: predictable motion. Predictable motion is why you can navigate at sea. It is why you can aim an antenna. It is why you can calculate when a satellite will pass overhead. It is why the boat can hide in a vast ocean and still know where it is. Navigation underwater is its own quiet miracle. You cannot use ordinary satellite signals deep underwater. Radio waves at those frequencies do not penetrate seawater well. So submarines rely on inertial navigation systems, which are basically very sensitive motion trackers. An inertial system measures acceleration and rotation. It integrates those measurements over time to estimate position. This is elegant and also annoying because small errors accumulate. Drift builds, so you occasionally need updates. You might use a periscope at shallow depth for fixes. You might use sonar, bathymetry, comparing seafloor maps. You might receive very low-frequency communications that can penetrate water to some extent, though bandwidth is limited. Even communication becomes a physics negotiation. Water absorbs and distorts. Certain frequencies travel better. Certain antennas work only at certain depths. Everything has trade-offs. Your submarine is a compromise machine. And that is another place you and the universe align. The universe also runs on compromises between gravity and velocity, between pressure and temperature, between energy and entropy. There is no perfect. There is only stable enough. Now, to keep this grounded, let us take gravity back down into your body, because your body is also a pressure vessel, in a way. Your blood pressure exists because your heart pumps fluid through tubes. Gravity affects that. Stand up, and gravity pulls blood downward, making it harder to return from your legs. That is why veins have valves, little gates to prevent backflow. In microgravity, those valves still exist, but the problem changes. Fluids redistribute. The body responds by reducing blood volume over time. It thinks it has too much fluid because it is not pooling in the legs. Astronauts can end up with thinner blood volume, and when they return to Earth, gravity hits them like a bill. They can feel faint when standing because the system readjusted to a world without that constant pull. Again, nature is economical. It adapts to the environment you give it, not the environment you miss. Underwater, pressure is outside your hull. In space, pressure is outside your suit. In both cases, your body is always trying to keep the inside chemistry stable. Stability is life. And this is why the submarine feels like an orbiting spacecraft in spirit. Both are closed systems. Both rely on controlled atmospheres. Both rely on energy management. Both rely on humans doing procedures correctly while sleep-deprived. The difference is that in space, you cannot pretend there is a rescue boat nearby. In the deep ocean, you also cannot pretend that too much. But humans are very good at pretending, until the pretense is expensive. So you practice, and you measure, and you build redundancy. Redundancy is not just extra equipment. It is extra knowledge. It is extra habits. It is extra people cross-checking each other. It is the social version of a backup pump. And that social redundancy has its own physics. Human groups have flow, they have pressure, they have friction. A tired crew is like a cooling system with reduced flow. Small problems carry heat longer. Decisions slow. Miscommunications happen. Tempers rise. Errors propagate. So leadership on a submarine, when it is competent, is not just about command voice. It is about managing human entropy, food schedules, sleep opportunities, workload distribution, training, morale. The soft systems that keep the hard systems from being misused. Because you can have the best reactor on Earth and still lose to a tired human skipping a step. Now, you might expect, after all this, that gravity is the final boss, that it is the biggest force in your life. It is not. It is just the most obvious. Electromagnetism holds your atoms together. Strong nuclear forces hold nuclei together. Gravity is actually weak at small scales. It only dominates because large masses accumulate. But gravity is the one you can feel every second. It is the one that turns into pressure in water and air. It is the one that makes the universe build spheres. Planets become round because gravity pulls everything toward the center, and the sphere is the shape that distributes that pull evenly. Mountains exist because material strength resists gravity's desire to smooth everything. So every mountain is a compromise between rock strength and gravitational insistence. Your submarine hull is the same kind of compromise. Material strength resisting pressure. Pressure exists because gravity is pulling down on water. Everything circles back. And as you keep drifting outward in thought, you start to see the long, repetitive patterns that make the universe feel almost sleepy itself. The Earth rotates. Day follows night. The moon orbits. Tides rise and fall. Seasons cycle. Planets circle the sun. The sun circles the galaxy. The galaxy moves in a larger flow. It is all loops on loops, a cosmic set of routines. Routine is not just a human coping mechanism. It is the shape of stable motion. And that is comforting, until you remember that stable motion can still be deadly, because a bullet is also stable motion, and it still ruins your day. So comfort is not the same as safety. Comfort is the feeling of predictability. And predictability is what lets you sleep. Your bed is a stable system. Your room is a controlled atmosphere. Your walls are your hull. Your heating and cooling are your life support. Your schedule is your artificial day and night. You are already living in a tiny submarine, just with better snacks and fewer torpedoes. Now, since you have been so patient with gravity, let us give it one more quiet twist. The way gravity shapes time. This is where people usually get dramatic. They start talking about time dilation like it is a superpower. It is not. It is a correction factor. In general relativity, gravity is not just a force pulling things. It is the curvature of space-time. Massive objects curve space-time, and other objects follow paths in that curved geometry. Translation for human ears: mass tells space and time how to bend, and bent space tells mass how to move. And time runs slightly differently depending on gravitational potential. Clocks closer to a massive object tick more slowly than clocks farther away. The effect is small for Earth, but it is measurable. It matters for global positioning system satellites, for example. Their clocks experience different rates due to both their speed and their position in Earth's gravitational field. Engineers correct for it. If they did not, your navigation would drift. So even your phone's map quietly depends on Einstein. Not because the universe likes being elegant, because it likes being precise. Now, imagine trying to run a submarine without corrected timing. Navigation errors would build. Communication synchronization would drift. The whole web of modern systems depends on timekeeping. Timekeeping is the ultimate watchstanding. You are monitoring the rhythm of reality. And of course, the best clocks we have are based on atoms. Atomic clocks use the frequency of radiation absorbed or emitted when electrons in atoms change energy levels. Cesium is famously used. The definition of a second is tied to a specific transition frequency. So your time is not set by the sun anymore. It is set by atoms doing predictable things. Nature replaced by procedure. again. And now you can feel the true scale change from a reactor operator watching neutron behavior to an atomic clock watching electron behavior to satellites watching orbital behavior to planets watching gravitational behavior. It is all watching. It is all supervision. The universe is a machine that mostly runs itself, but the parts you care about require constant tending. That is your curse and your talent. Now, let us bring it back down, because the cosmic stuff can get too airy, and you are still supposed to be in a steel tube with humming pumps. Inside the submarine, gravity means everything that leaks will drip downward. It means sump systems exist. It means bilges collect water. It means you can find problems by following wetness. Underwater, leaks are common in the small sense. Not hull breaches, not cinematic flooding. Small leaks, a valve packing that seeps, a gasket that weeps, a fitting that loosens. These are not exciting. They are chores. But chores matter because seawater is corrosive. Salt water is an electrolyte. It accelerates corrosion, encourages galvanic reactions between dissimilar metals. So you keep seawater where it belongs, outside. And even inside, you manage corrosion. Metals corrode because they want to return to lower energy states. Oxidized forms, iron becomes iron oxide. It is chemistry's slow preference. You fight it with coatings, cathodic protection, material choice, and relentless maintenance. Cathodic protection is a wonderfully unromantic trick. You attach a more reactive metal, a sacrificial anode, so it corrodes instead of the structure you care about. The sacrificial anode gives up electrons more readily, protecting the main metal. It is like bringing a friend to a mosquito swamp and being offended when the mosquitoes like them better. Congratulations, you have weaponized chemistry's preferences. Inside the reactor plant, corrosion control is even more careful. Water chemistry is controlled to reduce oxidation. Materials are chosen for compatibility. Oxygen levels can be managed because dissolved oxygen can drive corrosion. Even tiny impurities matter over long time periods. That is the submarine lesson again. Long time underwater means small problems have time to become big problems. And that is also the orbit lesson. Long time in space means small perturbations accumulate. A tiny drag force over months changes an orbit. A tiny leak over days empties a tank. Long time scales make the quiet forces loud. Now, your mind might ask, if everything is so controlled, what actually makes reactor operations difficult? It is not that the physics is unknown. It is that the system is coupled. Everything affects everything. When electrical load changes, steam demand changes. Steam demand changes heat removal. Heat removal changes coolant temperature. Coolant temperature affects reactor reactivity in many designs through feedback effects. Feedback is the part people forget. In many reactor designs, there are negative feedbacks that help stability. If temperature rises, the reactivity can decrease, lowering power. This is called a negative temperature coefficient. Translation: the reactor has a built-in tendency to calm down when it gets too warm. That is not magic. It is material properties. Fuel expands, changing geometry. Coolant density changes, affecting moderation. Neutron behavior shifts. These effects vary with design, and they are engineered carefully because you want the system to be forgiving. Forgiving is the best feature in any machine that relies on humans. But forgiving does not mean careless. It means you have more time to correct. So the operator's job is to ride those feedbacks smoothly, not to fight them, not to force them, to anticipate how the system will respond and make changes that settle rather than oscillate. Oscillation is a sign of poor control. It is the machine version of anxiety. And yes, your body has feedback loops too. Blood sugar regulation, temperature regulation, breathing regulation. They keep you stable until they do not, which is why the submarine keeps the environment stable to reduce how hard your body has to work. Now, if you zoom out again, gravity is the largest feedback loop of all. Too much mass in one place and everything falls toward it. That creates stars. Stars burn. Burning pushes outward with radiation pressure. Gravity pulls inward. A star is a balance of collapse and push. The sun is basically a reactor too, just without your checklists. It fuses hydrogen into helium, releasing energy, because the final products have slightly less mass than the initial. That missing mass becomes energy, according to the famous relationship between mass and energy. But the sun is not controlled by humans. It is controlled by gravity and plasma physics. It self-regulates through feedback. If fusion rate increases, the core heats. Pressure increases, the core expands slightly. Temperature drops. Fusion slows, the core contracts. Heats up. Fusion increases. A star is a thermostat made of fire. And compared to that, your submarine reactor is almost adorable. It is a tiny, civilized heat source with manners built to avoid drama. Still, you treat it with respect because tiny drama can be enough. Now, the idea of a star might feel far from your bunk, but it is not. The energy you use, even in fossil fuels, ultimately comes from the sun. Plants capture sunlight through photosynthesis. Fossil fuels are stored sunlight from ancient ecosystems. Even wind is driven by uneven solar heating. Nuclear fission is different in that it uses energy stored in atomic nuclei from processes that occurred in stars long before the Earth formed. Heavy elements were forged in stellar explosions and neutron-star mergers. The uranium in fuel was born in violence. So yes, the quiet hum of your reactor is powered by ancient cosmic catastrophe. But you do not need to be poetic about it. It is still just heat in water moving through pipes. And that is the comfort, really. The universe can be grand and indifferent, and you still have to check the same valve position every watch. Your life is lived at human scale, even when the fuel is cosmic. Now, since you have been patient with all these patterns, you can linger on one more piece of predictable physics that makes both submarines and satellites possible. Conservation laws. Conservation of energy. Conservation of momentum, conservation of angular momentum. They sound like textbook phrases. In practice, they are the reason the universe does not feel random. Angular momentum is why a spinning figure skater speeds up when pulling arms inward. It is why planets sweep faster when closer to the sun. It is why a submarine's rotating machinery has effects you must manage. Rotating masses resist changes in orientation. Gyroscopic effects can stabilize or complicate motion. In navigation systems, gyroscopes are used to maintain orientation references. Modern systems use ring laser gyros or fiber optic gyros, using light interference to detect rotation. Again, light and math doing quiet work so you can steer. And when you steer underwater, you are using control surfaces to create lift forces in water. Water flows over the planes. Pressure differences create upward or downward forces. Same principle as wings in air, just denser fluid. You angle the planes, and the boat climbs or dives as it moves forward. Without forward motion, control surfaces are less effective. Then you rely more on buoyancy changes. So speed, depth, trim, and control are all connected, and connected systems are always at risk of cascades. That is why you avoid sudden changes. Sudden changes excite coupling. They make one parameter swing, then another, then another. You want the system to settle, not to argue. So you adjust slowly. You wait. You observe. You adjust. Again. That waiting is the hardest part for humans. Waiting feels like doing nothing, and doing nothing feels like losing control, even when it is exactly what control requires. This is why procedures are written to slow you down. They force you to pause. They force confirmations. They force communication. Because the enemy is not the reactor. The enemy is your urge to hurry. Now, you might think that with enough automation, humans would not need to do this. The machine could watch itself. The machine could correct itself. And to some extent, it does. Automatic control systems maintain set points. Protective systems trip when thresholds are crossed. Alarms alert you. But automation introduces its own boredom. Humans become supervisors of systems that mostly behave. That makes attention even harder. You end up with a paradox. The safer the system, the harder it is to stay engaged, and the more likely you are to be unprepared for the rare moment it misbehaves. This is a known issue in aviation too. Pilots in modern aircraft often monitor automated systems, and the rare hand-flying skills can degrade. When automation fails, the sudden demand for manual skill can be sharp. So training focuses on keeping humans competent for rare events. Drills, simulators, practice. Submarine operators drill casualties. Astronauts drill emergencies. Hospital staff drill codes. It is all rehearsal for the moment boredom ends, which, if you are lucky, never happens. Now, as your thoughts keep circling, you can feel the narrative pulling toward another long, predictable pattern. The way systems cycle, the reactor cycle, heat to steam to turbine to electricity. The breathing cycle, oxygen in, CO2 out. The orbit cycle, fall, miss, fall, miss. Cycles are how stable systems dissipate energy and keep going. And your own sleep is a cycle too. Stages of sleep, waves of brain activity, slow shifting chemistry. You are not just resting, you are cycling into a maintenance mode. The submarine does something similar. It has maintenance schedules, daily checks, weekly checks, planned overhauls. The boat sleeps in its own way. During refit, when systems are opened, inspected, repaired. But when you are at sea, the boat is awake, always. So your job is to keep its wakefulness boring. Now, let us stay with gravity one more time, but bring it into the place where it becomes strangely intimate, your inner ear. Your vestibular system uses tiny fluid-filled canals and otolith organs to sense rotation and acceleration. Little crystals shift with gravity and movement, bending hair cells and sending signals. On land, this works well enough. Underwater, in a moving submarine, it still works. But your reference frame becomes more complex. In space, it becomes confused because gravity is not providing the constant downward reference. This is why space motion sickness is common at first. Your eyes report one thing, your inner ear reports another. The brain does not like disagreement. It assumes poisoning because evolution is dramatic, so you feel nauseated, not because space is disgusting, but because your sensory systems are arguing. And submariners can experience their own sensory oddities too. Without day-night cues, the brain's timing can drift. With constant low-frequency noise and vibration, sleep can be lighter. With recycled air and controlled humidity, sinuses can feel different. Small discomforts can accumulate. Again, small forces, long time scales. So you respect the boring, you respect the small, you respect the quiet. And as you keep respecting it, you start to realize that the submarine is not just a machine. It is a habitat, an ecosystem. Humans inside produce heat. They produce moisture. They produce CO2. They produce smells. Microbes grow on surfaces. Food is stored. Waste is managed. Waste, by the way, is one of the least romantic systems on the boat, and therefore one of the most important, because waste is biology insisting on being acknowledged. Managing sewage in a submarine involves tanks, treatment, and careful discharge procedures. At depth, the outside pressure is high, so you cannot just casually push waste out. You may need to pressurize systems to match sea pressure. You may store waste until conditions allow discharge. It is all plumbing, but with consequences. And if you want a final insult, remember that the reactor operator, the person supervising nuclear physics, is still a mammal that needs to use a toilet. No amount of education exempts you from plumbing. So when you think of human civilization, think less of monuments and more of waste management. That is where the real engineering lives. Now, you can sense the theme settling. Predictable physics, slow patterns, gravity shaping everything from pressure to orbits to tides, systems built to keep humans alive inside hostile environments. And the best systems are the ones that fade into the background. Which brings you back to the most comforting and infuriating truth about the universe. It runs on repetition. The same equations describe falling apples and falling moons. The same heat transfer principles describe cooling a reactor and cooling your coffee. The same fluid dynamics describes air moving through vents and water moving past hulls. The scale changes, the stakes change, the principles remain, and because the principles remain, you can trust them, even when you do not trust yourself. So you let gravity be the steady beat behind everything. You let it be the reason you can predict, the reason you can build, the reason you can sleep. But there is still more to say, because predictable physics is comforting and also deeply uninterested in you. Gravity will keep pulling. Orbits will keep looping. Entropy will keep smearing. Metals will keep corroding. Neutrons will keep tapping doors. And you, small and warm, will keep building little controlled bubbles where you can pretend that stability is normal, which is why your mind keeps returning to the hum of machines, not because it is exciting, but because it is a lullaby made of constraints. And as that hum continues, you find yourself thinking about one more quiet detail. The way falling never ends. It just changes what you call it, sinking in the ocean